Well, good afternoon to everyone. It appears, I believe, for many, many people living in society today, even around the world, in various churches, groups, organizations, it just seems that there's long periods of silence from our Creator God in heaven. A lot of people look at it that way. They say, why doesn't God Almighty intervene? Well, why is He so quiet? Why isn't something being done, said, or being moved ahead and stopped for some of the things going on around this world? Have you ever wondered, brethren, why that may be? People think that way. God is silent, and He hasn't said anything, hasn't done anything, and it just seems like societies and people just keep going on and on and on, and nothing seems to be going right or said about it to straighten things out. So, the question comes up in my mind, what would He say to anyone if He decided to keep silent on what is taking place? Or what would He say if He wanted to say something and approach people, governments, and whoever? What would He have to say to them? Do we really want to hear from our Creator God in heaven and what He is going to do and say? Well, brethren, this is my title today, that God is not silent. He is not silent. Well, brethren, we've had all kinds of warnings throughout history. History, the Scriptures itself, the Bible, and everything about how to live right. That includes world governments, people in general, what to say, do, and how to conduct our lives. It's been there all along. So we can't say our Father in heaven has been silent about anything. So what I want to do at this point, we have history to tell us, we have the Bible to tell us, and people don't want to look at history and learn their lesson, do they? All you have to do is look at World War II. Did anybody learn anything from World War I? Not to have World War II, but that's a whole other story as to how that got started. And we have other nations that hate this country. That's a future event that's going to happen. It's going to start in Europe, by the way. But be that as it may, it just seems like generally people don't learn from history. They just don't. Things happen. They forget about it, and it happens all over again. It seems like they keep reinventing this wheel of warfare and social problems. It just keeps going on and on and on. What I like to do, brethren, is look at King David of ancient Israel. Now, all of us know he was a man after God's own heart. The Scriptures bear testimony to that. He spoke to King David. He was not silent towards him, but he spoke to him through prophets. Now, I need to make this clear in the beginning. Our Father in heaven would never, ever approach a human being at any time on this earth and stand before him and talk to him, simply because the power and his brilliance, because the Scriptures bear testimony that he's an ever-consuming fire. He could never, ever talk to any one of us. I mean, if he stood in front of me and say, out there, I'd be a pile of ashes, because his brilliance and power is so great. I'm sure I would hope he would send somebody to talk to me. And but I would never want to see him in the flesh like this. Moses asked the same question on Mount Sinai. He said, Lord, that I may see you. He said, Moses, if you would see me, he said, you wouldn't live. So it's right to the point. He would just be dead, gone, ashes, so on. So he sends prophets. So he did that for King David. At all times, King David of ancient Israel was spoken to by prophets. Now, it's occurred to me, or at least it seems to me, that our Father in heaven doesn't need to speak to us if we're doing what's right. He doesn't pat us on the head or say he's doing a good job, you know. It just seems like we're doing what's right and everything seems to be going okay. So some people look at it that way. Well, he doesn't have to talk to me. I'm doing fine. You know? It's the I'm doing fine syndrome, you know. But then when something happens, we have to get on our knees and pray to him to put a stop to something else that may occur in our life. So prophets, brethren, are not sent to us to tell us that we're doing fine. You ever notice that in reading in scriptures and history? That prophets are sent to tell people, nations, groups, ever since time immemorial, that, hey, you're going in the wrong direction. Stop doing that. And he's done it many times. He's sent prophets into Israel. He sent a prophet into Nineveh. And because our Father in heaven was going to destroy these people. But he really didn't want to, but he wanted them to change their ways. So he sent prophets in to get them on the right track. Okay. So our Father in heaven, brethren, is always apt to tell us, he says, you want to hear me speak? Read the Bible. Read it. Understand it. Search it. Wrestle with it. That's what we're supposed to be doing, brethren. Searching the Scriptures. We want to know what our Father in heaven wants and how he speaks. Read the Bible. Now, you want a real good example of this type of incident and occurrence? Let's look at Luke 16, 19 to 31. This is about Lazarus and the rich man. This is very typical as to how people react, people's attitude. Let's look at that. Let's look at Luke 16. Just go there. And I will read this to you. It'll be an eye-opener as to people's attitude and response. Luke chapter 16. Starting in verse 19. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat that from the food that fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. But what a condition to be in having that happen to you. So the time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. So, in this hole in the ground, this Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away, with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, Father Abraham, have pity on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire. But Abraham replied, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you is a great chasm, and it has been fixed, so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us. He answered, Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers. Let them warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment. But Abraham replied, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. No, Father Abraham, he said, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. And he said to them, If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead. Wow, does that drive the point home on attitude about people? Now, I want to turn over briefly to Mark chapter 8. Let's look at that just for a moment. Mark chapter 8. And I want to read to you about people wanting a sign of some kind. They want to hear from God, some kind of a sign. And this is what our Messiah said. He says, The Pharisees came and began to question Jesus to test him. They asked him for a sign from heaven. Okay? And he sighed deeply, and he said, Why does this generation ask for a miraculous sign? I tell you the truth, no sign will be given it. There was our Messiah. The Word made flesh stood right before them and told them that. And they still didn't believe him. He was right there. Well, that's something else. This whole thing, seeking a sign, is the same. It's the same principle, brethren, as people wanting to hear from God. Why is God silent? Well, he's not silent. He's given us everything we need to know as to how to live right. So we can take away from this parable a real simple truth. Our Father in heaven, brethren, has already spoken to us, to this entire generation, generations before us, and generations coming after us. He's already said what he needs to say. The written testimony of the Scriptures, and there's history. The history in the Scriptures as to what happened to nations way back and from the beginning, and we can see what's happening today. Even go back 50, 100 years, and we still see and learn from history about how things go wrong. Okay, now, it would be pointless for our Father in heaven to send somebody today and to stand before groups of people, because they're not going to listen. I mean, it's amazing. There may be some, but very few. But the majority of people will say, oh, yeah, well, I've heard that before. And and they want a sign from heaven. They want a prophet to stand before them from God, to appear before them. It's not going to work. It just isn't. Not the way people think in their attitude. Let's look at Hebrews 1. In the book of Hebrews. Let's turn over there for a moment. Hebrews chapter 1. In verse 1, in the past, our Father in heaven spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom he made the universe. He made the universe. Wonderful to hear that, because he is the architect and designer of human beings and this earth. So, we not only have Moses and the prophets and all those people, brethren, we also have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We have the prophets of the Old Testament and what they've said, what they've predicted. We have John, who was banished to the island of Patmos. He wrote Revelation. He's given us a lot of information about future events. So there's really no excuse for us not to know what is to come. Okay? So he has spoken his truths, and he's not going to do any more than that. I'll never forget, years ago when I was my late teens, my dad and I used to, in the living room of our home, we used to talk about scriptures, because my dad was pretty heavy into it, and he thought about it a lot in relation to what was going on this is back in the 1980s, 70s, and 60s, and mostly in the 70s and 80s. And he said to me one day, and my dad had a way of impressing me when he talked to me. He says, look, and he didn't yell at me or anything, but he was just very to the point. He said to me, he said, look, our Creator God in heaven isn't going to strike down a bolt of lightning in front of you and tell you, I don't want you doing that. He said, don't get involved in that. He said, he doesn't work that way. And so bolts of lightning aren't going to work. That sort of thing. It would scare the daylights out of me if I saw one nearby, if I survive it. But anyway, he was getting a point across that the scriptures are there. We know history. We know what's going on and where we're going. And I'll have to say, brethren, the majority of people in this nation are not aware of all this sort of thing. They're just not. They're not taught it. And it's just, I don't know where they're going to wind up. I mean, it doesn't look good to me, but they just are just unknowledgeable about scriptures and what is going on. So, let's look at 2 Peter, brethren. 2 Peter chapter 1. This is an interesting verse. I'm going to read chapter 1, verse 16 to 19, 2 Peter. Okay. He says here, we did not follow cleverly invented stories when we told you about the power and the coming of our Messiah, Yeshua the Messiah, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. For he received honor and glory from our Creator in heaven, the Father, when the voice came to him from the majestic glory, saying, this is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. We ourselves heard this voice that came from heaven when we were with him on the sacred mountain. And we have the word of the prophets made more certain, and you will do well to pay attention to it, as to a light shining in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts. In other words, we have the truth. We're kind of lit up with the truth. It rises in our hearts. We understand and we know. Now, go back to Amos chapter 8. Chapter 8, verse 11 to 12. He warned us about certain things in the book of Amos. This is in the Early Testament. Let's go to there for a moment. Book of Amos, chapter 8. Okay. He says here, brethren, I'm going to read verse 11 and 12. This is a futuristic prophetic statement. The days are coming, declares the eternal God, when I will send a famine through the land, not a famine of food or a thirst for water, but a famine of hearing the words of the Lord. I can see that coming because there's a lot of individuals, groups and individuals, and maybe, I don't know, it could be in the broadcasting industry, but they seem to want to squelch and tone down any kind of Christian radio programs. And in some cases with this COVID virus, they don't even want you singing in church. Can you imagine that? You can go in there, but you're not allowed to sing. I heard about that somewhere down south in Georgia. They restricted one church from people going in there and singing. Well, that didn't fare very well with them or the community. So a judge put a stop to that. He said, you don't go and tell these people they can't sing in church. So, well, in any event, brethren, today, how far do you have to go to get a Bible? It can be purchased online, or I'm sure there's religious bookstores around that still have them. So it just seems like the people of today are looking for something more current. Something new, I guess, and they've got this attitude, well, we've got to have something new or something more dazzling. They like to be dazzled by things today. But the scriptures aren't going to be changed for us or any generation. They're here, it's historical, and it's prophetic, and it's telling us how to conduct our lives and what to do. And our leaders can well be aware of that, I hope, and try to live by it. So they want something up to date. Now, I think we have to keep in mind, brethren, there's going to come an event, and it's going to come upon this earth, where our Father in heaven is going to send two witnesses, two of them. And they're going to come here for a good reason. They're going to come here to convict this world that we live in today of their lawlessness. And these two men are not going to be liked. There's going to be a lot of people to try to kill them and do away with them. But they're not going to be very successful, except towards the end. Now, if you want to know about these two witnesses, we should, if we're not aware, we should be. It's a future event that's coming, and it's written in Revelation. Let's turn there. Book of Revelation. Going to go to chapter 11. Okay. I'm going to read to you verses 3 to 10 on this. Two witnesses, verses 3 to 10. He says here, I will give power to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the eternal of the earth, the God of this earth, to our Messiah. If anyone tries to harm them, fire comes down out of their mouths and devours their enemies. This is how anyone who wants to harm them must die. These men have power to shut up the sky so that it will not rain during the time they are prophesying. And they have power to turn the waters into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they want. Now, when they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up from the abyss will attack them and overpower and kill them. Their bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which is figuratively called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. For 3.5 days, men from every people, tribe, language, and nation will gaze on their bodies and refuse them burial. The inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them and will celebrate by sending each other gifts, because these two prophets had tormented those who live on the earth. This is a future event that's coming. I mean, you talk about torment, these two men are going to really be forthright and right to the point, and they're not going to mince any words. There's not going to be any political correctness. That's gone when they're walking this earth and prophesying. And he's going to convict nations of their lawlessness, their debauchery, and their wrong ways of living, and how they're teaching their people. Well, brethren, these two witnesses I mentioned are going to convict this world of lawlessness, but when Jesus comes back, Yeshua, he's going to rule over this earth. And believe me, I look forward to him coming back and ruling with a rod of iron, because the people of this earth need some discipline and strictness so that people can be put in the right road of life and to flourish and to do what's right. As we know, keeping the commandments, it brings more life and more joy, more happiness, and it's just a wonderful thing. But today, I don't think people really understand or even know the commandments exist anymore. It just seems that way. So with that rod of iron that Jesus is going to rule this earth with, and he's going to rebuke nations from afar off, and believe me, and he'll tell them right to their faces what they're doing in an evil way, and they're going to be made to straighten out. So you see, our Creator God is not silent. He's not going to be silent, and he has his way, because he tells us, my ways are not your ways, and he's going to straighten things out on this earth. And people are going to understand and know how to live right and do what's right. So yes, God is not silent. He never has been.